All right, good morning. And welcome to the month of March. Those of you worshiping with us at our other campuses, I'm so pleased that today we get to jump into the second installment of this midwinter series called Correcting Spiritual Drift. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to, for a moment, to take your mind to summer. All right, I want you to imagine a lake. I want you to imagine a dock. I want you to imagine warm weather. Is your brain there? Yeah? Okay, now see, because of our telepathy, I know exactly the image you came up with. It was this right here. It's actually a picture from where I graduated from high school, Sacramento, California. That's Folsom Lake a few years back. And my wife, Chris, her family, much of them still live in the Sacramento area. So we get out there from time to time. Now, that's not what Folsom Lake is supposed to look like. That's Folsom Lake during a drought. Here's kind of a before and after picture. That's what it's supposed to look like when they get adequate rainfall. It's actually, there's a dam, actually a reservoir. And that's what it looked like just a few years back, 2014. And so let's go back to the image of just the docks here and the baked ground. I just have a question for you. Have you ever had to navigate a drought in your life? And here, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the different kinds of droughts we experience, like a relational drought. At one point in your life, you were kind of all friended up, but you had more friends than should be legally allowed. And then you moved. And suddenly it was trying to find a new church, new job. You kept in email contact with old friends, but it wasn't the same as hanging out. Or you stayed and people in your life gradually started moving away or moving on. And you would just say, you know, right now we're in a relational drought. We just don't have friends, people in our life like we did at one time. It's a relational drought. There's an emotional drought, where you just find yourself in a depressive state. And you go, what's wrong with me? Is it that I haven't seen sunshine for 45 consecutive days? But you just find yourself in kind of an emotional downtime, an emotional drought. I know more than a few of you have experienced a financial drought. There was a sickness, there was a surgery, there was a setback. There was some kind of situation, and man, you were clawing month after month just to pay bills and pay rent or a mortgage. You went through a financial drought. Right out of the gate, I just want you to know something about droughts. They're common. They are common in life to have to journey through a drought. Baby, either you have been through one, you're in one today, or your day's coming, a drought of some sort or another. And in part 2 of Correcting Spiritual Drift, our story opens with a drought. And I just want to start by reading one verse to you, 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1. There's a prophet by the name of Elijah, and Elijah appears before this king named King Ahab, and this is the message that Elijah throws down. He says, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. That doesn't sound nice. I mean, it doesn't sound Jesus-y at all, does it? Here's Elijah, the prophet. He comes in front of the king and he says, the ground is going to bake. The crops are going to die for this next stretch of our lives. There will be a drought, and this will mean economic ruin for the Israelites. What's up with this? We'll get to that in a few minutes. But for now, I just want you to know that what happens here is that the camera zooms in. Instead of being on the entire nation, entire people of the Israelites, the camera zooms in to this one guy, Elijah, and how Elijah navigates this drought and how God meets him in this drought. And the important thing for us today is this, that often our gracious God is pleased to do some of his very best work when we're in a drought. While we hate traveling through droughts, while we do everything we can to avoid traveling through a drought, A drought can be an absolute greenhouse for transformational growth. God does some of his best work when we find ourselves in a drought of one sort or another. Now, today, perhaps this message is for you. And today, perhaps this message is for someone in your life. Because if you've got someone around you who is traveling through a drought and they start sounding all hopeless and end of the world, as you look into their eyes and try to be a voice of encouragement to them, it's your opportunity to know God does some of his best work in this space. Sister, you don't like this space, you don't want this space, you want to get out of this space, but right now, your gracious God might be pleased to meet you in this space in a powerful, powerful way. And so do everything you can today to absorb what's happening in this story on Elijah in this drought. I think we all need a reminder for ourselves and those around us that our gracious God can be at his finest when we travel through a drought. And so today, a breakdown of our conversation, three different opportunities that come our way whenever we find ourselves journeying through a drought. Opportunity number one has to do with heart exposure. Say those two words with me, heart exposure. Ready? Heart exposure. You see, it's often said that a crisis develops your character. A trial, a crisis forges character. My friends, it's also true that a crisis reveals your character. A drought is an opportunity for heart exposure. So let's go back to that verse on Elijah. 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1. Elijah is appearing before the king, King Ahab, and he says, as surely as the Lord, Yahweh, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. The ground will bake, the crops will die. Elijah is praying in this drought. You're gonna go, what's going on here? Just a couple steps of storyline. At one time, the Israelites had been enslaved in Egypt. And under the leadership of Moses, they exit Egypt and they become part of a rescue story. Now, I want you to see this from Exodus chapter 20, verse 2 and 3. We looked at these last week. This is God speaking to them, Mount Sinai, they're about to get the 10 commandments. I am the Lord your God who did what? Who brought you out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of slavery. Command number one, no other gods. When you move into your home here in Canaan, I want to be your one and only God. Don't worship Moloch through child sacrifice. Don't run off and worship Baal, the regional god of the area. As trade routes pass through your land and as caravans pass through your land, I want word to spread of this gracious, good, generous, and creative, invisible God who you offer your hearts to. If you start bowing down to all of the statuary that surrounds you, it's gonna implode this whole plan. I want to be your one and only God. Fast forward the tape to the days of Ahab, king of Israel. He has married a bride by the name of Jezebel from the city of Sidon. It's in another country, way to the north in Phoenicia. And when Jezebel moves down to Israel, she brings us something with her, and it may have looked something like this. This is a statue, a relic that they found representing the god Baal. Archaeologists have unearthed this, and Baal appears in many different forms, the god Baal, but this is one of them. And the upheld hand is like throwing a lightning bolt because Baal was credited with bringing the rain. Baal was credited with bringing the dew. Baal is the god of prosperity. So the region surrounding Israel, you worship one form of Baal or another because Baal promises fertility, Baal promises fruitfulness, and during the reign of that guy, King Ahab, Baal worship became the national religion of Israel. And so when Elijah shows up in Ahab's presence and says, as the Lord, Yahweh, the God of Israel, whom I serve, it's gonna bake here. What Elijah's basically saying is, y'all wanna work the Baal program, go for it. Let's see how Baal does the next couple years at really bringing the rain and really bringing the dew. He says, you wanna work the Baal program, go for it, but I'm praying that God will give us a drought to expose what's going on in our hearts. Now, as we showed that picture of Baal, a lot of you go, well, Jeff, I think the chances of someone from Ada Bible Church running out and finding one of those or, and bowing down to it in their family room, probably low odds. But as we said last week, an idol, a counterfeit God, is anything we look at and in our heart of hearts say, if I only get that, if I only get my hands on that, then now I will have value, now I will have meaning, now I will have significance, now I will have security. But then the problem is going, preacher, how do you know if you have a counterfeit God? I mean, how can you tell the difference between, savings is smart. How can you tell the difference when you're just being smart and setting money aside, and on the other hand, when your money has become a counterfeit God? How do you know that? How do you know with a house, whether a house is just a wonderful dwelling that you enjoy, that you make your home, or somehow when you've turned a hunk of real estate into something you depend on for your security, your significance, your meaning, and your value? How do you even discern that? How do you know whether you're just competitive and love sports or whether you've turned athletic competition into your only reason for living? How do you know? How can you tell whether you're just loving your kids and nurturing your kids or whether you've made well-behaved children? You're it, you're that thing that fulfills you in there. How do you know when something's a counterfeit God? Sometimes we don't until it's taken away, or it's threatened to be removed from our lives. And so sometimes you hear the story of a man or woman that would say, I had no idea until I got canned, until I got fired, that my job and my title had become everything. And I spiraled into a depression and I could not pull out. And it was in that drought that I learned, wow, that was not just a job that I loved. That had become everything to me. It's a girl sitting on the bench, soccer game. She's in street clothes. She's got a knee brace on. ACL surgery is around the corner. This is her third surgery in 2 years. And she goes, is this it? Is this it? And it is. And she realizes, I never realized that a sport had become my life until it was taken away. Often we can't identify something that we have made a counterfeit God until we lose it or until it's threatened to be removed from our lives. See, this is one of the opportunities of a drought. Sometimes a drought opens a door and exposes something. Now, I want to be clear about something here. If you experience a loss in life of any sort, big or small, my friends, there's an opportunity for legitimate sadness. So I want you to say those words with me. Legitimate sadness. Ready? Legitimate sadness. Somebody breaks up with you or dumps you, there's an opportunity for legitimate sadness. You have a career that you have thrown yourself into and it's pulled out from under you, there's an opportunity for what? For legitimate sadness. You nurture children and one of them in their teenage years shuts you out of their life and shuts down and stops communicating. There is an opportunity there for what? Legitimate sadness. But there's a difference between legitimate sadness and that was everything to me. And now that I've lost that, I've got nothing and I am nothing. Why even go on living? Sadness is something you travel through. But when we detect that we have a counterfeit God, we don't just get sad and travel through it. Often we bog down and we feel like now our life is over because we lost that. And I'm just saying, this is a wonderful moment of heart exposure when our gracious God can lean in and just ask, everything? You lost your house, you lost your job, you lost competitive sports, you lost the heart of a child, and you lost everything? That was your reason for living? And often our gracious God will whisper, I am the one who said, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you. It's possible to lose that and to grieve the loss of that with legitimate sorrow and to move through that sadness and not to lose everything. Listen, this is an important word for those of you that have a voice of encouragement in other people's lives. When you feel that they are spiraling into despair, and they lost a husband, they lost a wife, they lost a job, they lost a something, and they're like, I am just totally in despair. I have nothing now, trying to find the right time to remain silent and the time to speak. I do not believe that God has abandoned you. And if you know the saving power of the cross of Jesus, you have the nearness of Christ and the assurance of Christ and the presence of Christ and the peace of Christ and the faithfulness of Christ. You lost something and it is to be grieved, but sister, brother, you did not lose everything. But this is one of the opportunities in a drought. We go through a drought and it exposes some of the stuff going on. Here we go. A drought is an opportunity to correct spiritual drift, because it's sometimes that we are in a drought, sometimes in a drought, we discover how we have drifted without even knowing it. Elijah is in front of King Ahab, and he says, it's not going to rain. In fact, there's not even going to be any dew on the ground until by my word, the Lord restores the rain. Let's see how the Baal program works for you. And Elijah leaves Ahab's presence, and there's a whisper from the Creator into Elijah's life, and it's basically two words. He says, Elijah, I want you to run, and I want you to hide now, because there is going to be a nationwide manhunt for this guy as the earth continues to bake. We find the words, verses 2 and 3 of 1 Kings 17. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, leave here, turn eastward and hide in the Kerith what? Hide in a gulch. Wait a second, time out. There's no 7-Eleven there. No, there's not. There's no farmer's market. No, because there's no farmers. There's no people. Nobody lives there. Nobody. Hide in this gulch, hide in this ravine east of Jordan. Now, Samaria, the capital where Ahab ruled, is here. The Kerith ravine is only, I think it's like 15 miles away, the Kerith ravine. So Elijah, I need you to run there. I need you to hide. Wait, if there's no people and there's no farms and there's no stores, it's a good opportunity to starve to death. Opportunity number 2 when we travel through a drought, opportunity number 2 is to experience daily provision. Can you say those two words with me? Daily provision. Ready? Daily provision. Check out verse 4. It's interesting. You will drink from the brook. Cool. And I have directed ravens to supply you with food there. Did it occur to Elijah that ravens subsist on roadkill? Did he have any mental category for aviary catering? I have directed ravens to feed you. Whatever they drop, don't ask, cook it fast. You will stay alive. I'm going, did Elijah have friends? Did he have family? Now, you heard God tell you what now? Is this moment like, you have got to be kidding me. And so the next verse is just so powerful. It says, so he did what the Lord told him. Powerful words. He takes off, crosses the Jordan River at Kerith ravine. He went to the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan, and he stayed there. Now check this out in the next verse, verse 6. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. There's water, there's food. Help me here. Bread and meat in the morning, bread and meat in the evening. That's Monday. Tuesday, he wakes up. Bread and meat in the morning, bread and meat in the evening. That's Tuesday. Wednesday, you get the idea, right? Jesus' disciples, they come to him and they say, would you teach us to pray? Like you want your followers to pray? And what comes out next out of Jesus' mouth is fairly short. It's what we call the Lord's Prayer, or if you come from depending on your faith tradition, the Our Father. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed, may glory be to you, hallowed be your name. Someday may your kingdom come down here on earth just like it is where you dwell, and give us this day our daily bread. It's about daily provision. Do you realize how powerful this prayer is during a drought? When we pray, gracious God, please supply today the things I need today. Gracious God, I trust that you will supply today the things I need today. A drought is a wonderful opportunity to learn about God's daily provision. A drought that I traveled through, pretty significant, lengthy one, was just about 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I'd have been 36, 37. And those of you that were part of Ada Bible Church at the time might remember this little structure. This was the tent in which 800, 900 people gathered to celebrate the groundbreaking for our Cascade building, which we moved into in July of 2000. So we're coming up a year and a half from now on our 20th anniversary in our Cascade building. Following that groundbreaking service, we built this building right here. It was a massive amount of energy, a massive amount of planning, a big geographic move. And we move into our Cascade building after it is built, and you would think that I would have been like never better emotionally. And yet, right after moving into our Cascade building, this brand new facility, I slipped into a depression that lasted about a year. Now, it is the longest sustained season of discouragement. I've had little patches of discouragement in ministry, never month after stinking month of just being blue, just feeling like this cloud was following me. Now, I want to be clear about something. Some of you have suffered from what we might call clinical depression. Can't get out of bed, can't function, can't move, can't get things going. I wasn't hit at that level. This was like a bad case of the blues, where I was functional. It wasn't a clinical depression, but it was just a deep, abiding discouragement that just wouldn't lift. Now, it made absolutely no sense at the time. And now, of course, as I look back, I go, oh, there's some things about that make perfect sense. If we can go, back to the picture, it's just, it is common to experience an emotional dip whenever you've completed any major project. A degree or anything like that, building a house where you've thrown yourself into it and finally you're there and there's just been this outlay of energy and time and attention. So it's common to experience a dip when you've been through some major project. A second thing was, and this will surprise some of you, moving into that building didn't fix everybody. The geographic change didn't fix everybody. It will stun you to know this, that troubled marriages were still troubled when we changed the geography of our worship service. People that struggled deeply or were immature in their faith, guess what? They were still immature in their faith. And so you put all of this energy into this building, you move into this building, and then it's kind of like business, it's back to the grind of ministry as usual. So I slip into this drought, this lengthy discouragement. And so at the time, I was running with some buddies from a local swimming pool. We didn't swim there, but we'd show up, use the locker room, go for a run through some neighborhoods and come back. Remember exiting the shower one day, towel around my waist, pardon, it's personal, and walking past a row of lockers and looking in, and I knew a guy that was sitting there. It was an older guy. I knew his name was Dennis. We had never met, but I knew of him and he knew of me. And so this is how needy I was. I just walk up to him, towel around my waist, say, hey, I'm Jeff Manion. Oh, I'm, a pastor of Ada Bible Church, and he looks at me in the eye and says, how are you doing? I just went, not well. I don't like being me right now. Now, this is something I knew about Dennis. He had had awful, terrible bouts with depression, the kind that can't get out of bed. You lose a job, you recover, you find another job, you lose that job, unable to function, unable to work. So what we had experienced, nothing close to each other. But standing there between the lockers, I just went, so you got anything for me? And he goes, yeah, I wake up every day and I say, God will give me today whatever I need today. Today, God will give me the friend that I need. Today, God will give me the verse from the Bible that I need. Today, God will give me the medication that I need. He says, I just awaken every day and I say, God, please provide today the things I need today. I'm going to lead you in prayer. I just want you to whisper it. Gracious God, please provide today the things I need today. Say it again, just whisper it. Gracious God, please provide today the things I need today. One of the opportunities we experience in a drought is that when we go through this desert space that we don't want and we didn't invite and we don't like, often God is present and we learn of our Creator as our daily provider. It's how Jesus taught us to pray, give us this day our daily bread. Elijah, bread and meat in the morning, bread and meat in the evening. And he's fed something by the ravens. And wonderful, is there by this brook. It's a drought, but there's this brook. But the brook is not babbling anymore. It's like there's a deep pool over there and a deep pool there and a deep pool, but it's not really running. And then the pools start to go down and turn into puddles. And there's a day when he has to get down on his hands and knees and, scoop water out of a puddle just to have enough to hydrate. Yet no direction, no word from God, no, it's time to move on. I just wonder if there are times when Elijah just doesn't want to look up and go, hello, remember me. Remember me down here. As the water level keeps going down. And finally, Elijah awakens to the day when the water is gone. And this is when he receives word that it's time to move again. You'll like this. Then the word of the Lord came to him. Go to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. Does that sound promising to you? Probably a wealthy widow, right? Yeah, I guess again. By the way, where's he told to go? Zarephath in the region of Sidon. Is that Sidon thing? Is that ringing a bell with anybody? Yeah, those of you following the story, anybody from Sidon that you're familiar with so far in the story? Like Jezebel, the wicked queen of the north, Jezebel. Elijah is now told to hide out in Jezebel's backyard, someplace they might not look. But I've commanded a widow there, and so there's supposed to be some kind of intersection between him and someone who's probably barely making it. Okay, opportunity number 3 in a drought. Opportunity number 3 has to do with radical generosity. So Elijah goes, I think it's something in the neighborhood like 80 miles up to Sidon. And when he comes to this town, Zarephath, this village, there is a widow outside, and it tells us what she's doing. She's dropping things. She's picking up sticks like the size of sticks you'd use in making like a little fire to bake something. And so she's gathering sticks. And so Elijah calls to her and says, could you bring me some water? And so she turns around and she goes to get him some water, to bring him some water to drink. And as she's leaving, he goes, and if you wouldn't mind, can you bring me some bread too? And this is during a drought. And this widow who is picking up sticks turns to Elijah and utters what might be the most pathetic verse in the Bible. Listen to her voice. As surely as the Lord, your God, lives, she replied, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I have no pantry. My life is now down to this. That's it. So, well, it doesn't sound too pathetic, but keep reading. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son that we might eat it and die. This is the Last Supper for us. I'm gonna pick up a few sticks and then I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna pour the flour out and we're gonna add some water and we're gonna knead it into dough and then we're going to bake this bread with the sticks and the fire that I make and then we're gonna have it with olive oil and then we are going to starve to death. And now this is the time for Elijah to step forward and say, I'm so sorry, my bad. Guess again. Elijah said to her, 3 critical words, ready? Well, it's 4, but with the contraction 3. Ready? Don't be afraid. Say it one more time, ready? Don't be afraid. Go home and do exactly what you said you're going to do, make this last meal for you and your son. But he says, but first, make me a small loaf of bread of what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. Excuse me? It's one small request. Yeah, you do that, but first make me some dinner. And he says to her, the flour that's in that jar, you're gonna be able to pour it day after day after day, and it's not gonna run out. And the oil that you have, you're just gonna pour a little bit of that every day, and it's gonna like replenish itself. And this is the widow saying, what do you take me for? I mean, you would scam me in this hour. What were those 3 words I had you repeat out loud? Ready? Don't be afraid. Okay. Let's talk for a moment about fear. There's a possibility that fear may prevent you, may derail the most significant spiritual movement that God is calling out in your life. It may be possible that you are journeying with God, growing in your faith, learning day by day, and it stops. And sometime later, if someone goes back and says, hey, what happened back there? Sometimes the answer is, I got scared. Fear may prevent you from taking the most significant steps in your spiritual journey. Elijah's first words to the woman, do not be afraid. What he's calling out in this woman, in her drought, because they're experiencing the same drought, is an opportunity for radical generosity. An opportunity for radical generosity. November this past year, so 4 months back, early November, Chris and I found ourselves in Seattle and we were there together. I was speaking at a generosity conference. It's the craziest thing. People from around the country flew into Seattle, paid for their plane tickets and paid for their hotel in order to come to sessions all day for 2 days to learn about giving more of their money away. It's a strange group of people. And the biggest liability I had there was that I spoke, but I had to sit and listen to all of these other people talk about the radically generous life. It was ruinous. I mean, we've pursued generosity over the years. We faithfully carve out part of our income to give away year after year after year. Listening to some of these people, I felt like I was on training wheels in relationship to where they were. This guy, for instance, his name is Ed Foster. He says he looks kind of young. He is kind of young. That is Dr. Ed Foster. Ed Foster was headed in the direction of becoming a foreign missionary, loves the story of Jesus and how Jesus can absolutely transform the human life. And so he wanted to leave England, Cambridge-educated kid, leave England and go probably like to India or something to be a church planter. But then he took a trip to India, encountered some church planters there, and learned that many of the church planters going into a brand new town, a brand new village, a brand new city, and launching the first Jesus fellowship there, they can subsist on about, are you ready? Like $80 a month. And he starts thinking, how much does a doctor make? And if instead of going to India, if I stayed and simply used my salary, how many churches could I start simply from my salary? And so it works like this. Someone comes to Ed and says, hey man, can you take a night shift? He goes, how many hours? He says, we need you for 12 hours. I don't know, 7 o'clock in the evening, 7 o'clock in the morning. And they say, it's like $80 an hour. And he goes, $80 an hour, 12 hours. I can go to work tonight and fund a church plant for a year. Now, the way that Ed told his story, and by the way, he just wasn't one of the speakers. He was like sitting at our table, spoke the same evening I did. So there was just this wonderful opportunity to learn about his life. But the first year, he went way overboard. It's like, I'm not gonna buy any new clothes, which worked for about a year until his clothes were like in rags. And his Cambridge-educated mom was going like, what have you done? What have you done? And he said he had these shoes that he refused to get new shoes, and so they got holes in them, and he was duct taping up like way overboard. $15 a week for food because every spare penny was being sent to church planting. 4 years ago, he and his friends were sponsoring 4 churches. As of the conference in November, it was something like 330 churches and 330 fellowships from himself, brother, sister, and a few others that had been pulled in. And that's what I mean when I felt like, dude, you're on training wheels with this generosity thing. Because radical generosity, well, not that radical. By radical generosity, I mean where you begin to revolve your life priorities and you begin to revolve your dreams around attempting to channel money away from yourself. That's radical. So that's early November. Chris and I get back. We're at dinner, fresh from listening to all these speakers. And it was just one of those moments where we go, so what about us? What about us? And we just felt, I'm someday out in the future, I might tell you more about it. But we just felt prompted to take this generosity thing to a radical new level in our lives. And we implemented it immediately. So we're like 4 months into this new adventure. I have to tell you something that I dealt with along the way. It's a little word. Can any of you guess what the word is? Fear. Major breakthrough moment for you. I've got something. Those of you that are note-taking types, you're probably going to want to write this down. Ready? When you give money away, it's not yours anymore. When you give money away, it's not yours anymore. It's not yours to save. It's not yours to put in a retirement account. It's not yours for a new automobile. When you give money away, it's not yours anymore. It's not yours for home renovation. It's not yours for a kitchen remodel. It's not yours for a weekend getaway. It's not yours for a vacation somewhere. When you give money away, it's not yours anymore. And what God is calling us to is a life of trust, where I trust you. I believe that you're good. I believe that you're creative. I believe that you're generous. Now, a little detour from the Elijah story and the drought. The reason this is such an important conversation for us, is that I genuinely believe that Ada Bible Church could someday become one of the most generous churches in America. I really do. This right now is not an area of weakness for us. This is a strong, giving congregation. But it's so strong. I go, what if we moved from strong to extraordinary? What if we moved from faithful, man, to radical? What if some year out there in the future, this fellowship known as Ada Bible Church were to somehow be one of the national models for what it looks like to be a giving people, radical generosity? I'm telling you, this right here is where the battleground is going to be. Some of us fight greed. I bet for most of us, the enemy of generosity is not greed. I bet for many of us, the enemy of generosity is fear. It's this little question. If I'm spending my life and resources taking care of God's interests, who in the world is taking care of me? And there's a little voice that comes down that goes, I will, trust me. Now, let me think about that one. Way it works, I'm here. This G stands for generosity. This P stands for provision. And it's basically like God whispers, can you believe that I am inviting you into some kind of an adventure, into some kind of a radical loop where you give and I provide, and where you give and I provide, and where you give and I provide, and where you give and I provide? Trust me, this is exactly where the widow is. And I use the word radical generosity for this widow because whatever Christmas time checks I have written to Ada Bible or different organizations, I've never been asked to give my last meal. Elijah says, just make me a cake first. The flour will not run out. The oil will not run out until rain is restored and until crops are restored to this land. And the widow stands there with her pile of sticks, ready to go home for the Last Supper. And I'm thinking, no stinking way is she gonna do this. She went away and did what Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her. Did some nieces and nephews get in on this deal? It doesn't say for the woman and her son. It says for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up. The jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the I am, the Lord, spoken through Elijah. You go, I get it. What a beautiful story. God uses the widow to feed Elijah. No. God uses Elijah to feed the widow. And this widow collecting sticks for the Last Supper in a different country, in the home and capital of Baal worship, encounters a prophet from Israel and the God of Israel. And the drought that she's experiencing becomes an opportunity to know and to trust this God. Back to the drought. We despise them. We hate them, we try to avoid them, and when we're in them, we try to get out of them as rapidly as possible. But a drought can be the space where our gracious God does some of his finest work. If you're in a drought today, what's it like just to say, God, expose my heart, reveal counterfeit gods that might have taken your place? Please provide today the things I need today. Give me today my daily bread. God, I just trust you. I trust you with my life. I trust you with today, and I trust you with tomorrow. A drought can be a greenhouse for your transformational growth. God may be at his finest in the middle of your drought. And so we pray, gracious God, move us ahead one day at a time. Show yourself in power in our lives and help us to trust you. We ask this in the name of Jesus, who came here to rescue us and to give us life. It's in his name that we pray. Amen. We'll see you next week.